This is more like back in the 50s, Ford used this Fomoco style container, and then that eventually led way to, this is the same product, but now it's packaged under the Rotunda name, and this is going on in early 60s to around 67, 68, and then Ford came out with the racing car that they started using for their brand identification. But in addition to Fomoco and Rotunda, they also used other names like Fomoco, Autolite, Motorcraft. The Fomoco, we already saw an example from the 50s, but in the early 60s they went to the blue and gray style Fomoco container. But that wasn't politically correct, so again they switched to that true blue style. But we've also got a story about the Autolite and Motorcraft names. And the question I like to ask is, which came first, Autolite or Motorcraft? And we've got two tin cans here. You used to, there we go. Used to get tune-up kits in these kind of cans. You'd pop the top and there'd be 8 plugs in there if you had a 6-cylinder, and then a set of points and condenser and a little feeler gauge for checking that out. And this Autolite brand was real common starting in 68 and was used through 71, and Motorcraft is used from 72 until you can still today go down and get Motorcraft parts from your Ford dealer. But again, going back to our question, which came first, Autolite or Motorcraft? And from the dates I already gave you, most people will say, well, Autolite was first. And that's actually not true. Ford bought the Autolite name from Prestolite Corporation, and Prestolite used this 4-pointed star symbol, and when Ford bought the Autolite name, they continued to use that star until 1967, well, into 67, and then in 68 they went to this Autolite style and generally had the race car on with it. However, it turns out that actually right around 1961, Ford came out with this trademark name of Motorcraft, and they packaged Motorcraft was done like this. Now what I've got here is a bunch of DP5s, which are point sets that are used on a lot of our favorite cars, and from this we know it's the early style Autolite. And so we've got this whole pack of these in here. We take one of these DP5s out, and so you went down to your Ford dealer, and let's say you got your 1965 Mustang, and you say, yeah, I need to replace my points on there. And you get this box, and you say, well, let me open it up here and get my points out. And when you open it up and take it out, there we go. Now it's in a Motorcraft container. So they started using the Motorcraft name, and then when they bought the Autolite name from Prestolite, they just reboxed all this stuff. It wasn't worth someone taking it all out of the box and then transferring it in here, and they didn't want to throw it away, so they basically just put it a box within a box and started selling it. So the Motorcraft name was only available from Ford from kind of like 61 and into 62, and then you found yourself buying the Autolite parts. Ford kept looking at General Motors and seeing how they just kind of were growing bigger and bigger. I mean, you got to remember that the last time Ford built more cars than GM was about 1955, and now they're watching GM just getting bigger and bigger, and they don't like it, and they're looking at what GM is doing, and amongst other things, GM has created this product line called Delco Remy, and AC Delco, and they're selling these parts to gas stations, because back then, every corner had a gas station on it, and those gas stations all had service bays where they would repair people's cars. And GM's looking at it and saying, well, we can't get them to come into the dealer, so we might as well at least sell them parts. And Ford sees that and says, well, that's a good idea. And they already know that Prestolite Corporation has this Autolite brand, and Autolite is already being distributed into all of these service stations. And so they get the idea of, let's buy the Autolite division from Prestolite, and then we can be more like GM. But there was actually an interesting twist to that. Prestolite sold a lot of parts to Chrysler Corporation. And so Ford actually was thinking in this, hey, we can be more like GM, and we can also kind of put a little bit of hurt on Chrysler Corporation in this process, because now Chrysler won't be able to get their spark plugs from Prestolite anymore under the Autolite name, because we will have all of that spark plug manufacturing capability and the batteries and these other various parts that were being sold under the Autolite name. Now, there's an interesting story that goes with this, in that back in the late 50s into the early 1960s, one of the men that worked for Henry Ford II was Robert McNamara. And a lot of people are aware that Robert McNamara became the Secretary of Defense when John F. Kennedy became president. What they may not know is that he and Henry Ford II got into a big dispute, and Henry fired him. And he was rather disgruntled about this. And typical of these kind of high-stakes personality types, they revenge, retribution, whatever you want to call it. Robert McNamara winds up walking down the hall to the Attorney General, who happens to be Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy's brother, and he says to him, hey, there's a company out there that is guilty of antitrust. They're called Ford Motor Company, and they're using the Autolite name. And so Robert Kennedy winds up filing a lawsuit against Ford in federal court, and from basically the day that Ford had the Autolite name, they were in court over antitrust violations. And as it turned out, it took about 9 years for a judgment to be rendered against Ford, and Ford was found guilty of antitrust violation and was forced to sell off the Autolite name. And now they're scrambling, saying, well, we need a name. And so what do? They just bring back the Motorcraft name, just in their modern style packaging. So that's kind of the quick and dirty of how how this product branding went down in the 60s.